Judge Margaret O'Brien's gavel froze mid-air, her weathered hand trembling as 7-year-old Hope Elizabeth Carter's silent scream pierced the packed courtroom. The massive black German shepherd being dragged away by animal control officers wasn't just any dog. He was Shadow, the 95-pound guardian who had never left the tiny girl's side for 8 months. Gasps erupted from the gallery as Hope collapsed against her mother's chest, reaching desperately toward her four-legged protector with hands that seemed impossibly small. Dorothy Winchester, 73 and stone-faced on the witness stand, clutched her purse with white knuckles, watching the child she'd sworn to protect crumble before her eyes. "Your Honor," the bailiff whispered urgently, "the child appears to be having some kind of medical episode." How had a simple dog walked through the streets of Millbrook, Nebraska, torn an entire town apart? And what devastating secret had brought them all to this moment of no return? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 8 months earlier, the February wind cut through Millbrook, Nebraska like a blade, rattling the windows of empty storefronts along Main Street. This agricultural town of 3,200 souls had been slowly bleeding its young families for years, leaving behind a collection of weathered faces and fading dreams. The Carter family rental house on Elm Street stood modest and tired, its white paint peeling like old scabs, a testament to the financial struggles that had become as common as corn stubble in the fields. Hope Elizabeth Carter had been 7 years old for exactly 3 weeks when Shadow entered her world. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at 4, she moved through life like a ghost child, speaking only in whispers to her parents and retreating into silence whenever strangers appeared. Her father, Bobby Carter, 34 and built like the mechanic he used to be before the plant closed, spent his days fixing lawn mowers for $20 each while praying the work would last. Her mother, Sarah Jane, 32, with prematurely graying hair, pulled double shifts at Murphy's Diner, serving coffee and forced smiles to truckers passing through on Highway 30. The Carter family survived on $28,000 a year, every penny accounted for, every unexpected expense a potential catastrophe. Sarah's tips went toward Hope's speech therapy sessions at $200 a week, sessions that insurance deemed experimental and therefore worthless. Bobby's calloused hands counted and recounted their savings each night, watching the numbers shrink like hope itself. Shadow arrived on a Tuesday morning in a white van driven by a man who spoke in military precision and left without accepting coffee. The German shepherd stood 95 pounds of controlled power, his coat black as midnight, amber eyes holding an intelligence that seemed almost human. Hope, who had been watching cartoons in her pajamas, walked directly to the massive dog and placed her small hand on his head. For the first time in months, she smiled. 3 blocks away on Maple Street, Dorothy Winchester observed this transaction from her Victorian house's lace-curtained window. At 73, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had spent 40 years as a pediatric nurse, someone who understood the weight of life and death decisions. Her husband's absence still echoed through rooms filled with medical journals and photographs of grandchildren she hadn't seen in a decade. Dorothy had buried her grandson Tommy 12 years ago. 5 years old, bright red hair, laughter that could fill a room until the neighbor's dog silenced it forever. The lawsuit had torn her son's family apart, blame ricocheting between adults while a small coffin waited in the ground. Her son James and daughter-in-law Lisa had moved to Oregon within a month, taking their surviving children and their fury with them. Dorothy's last words from James still rang in her ears. "You were supposed to protect him. You were the nurse. You should have known." Now, watching Hope Carter disappear into her house with that massive black predator, Dorothy felt the familiar cold weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Not again. Never again. The transformation began at 7 o'clock on a crisp February morning when Hope Carter stepped onto Elm Street with Shadow at her side. No leash connected them, yet the massive German shepherd moved as if tethered to her soul, matching her pace with military precision. Their route never varied, down Elm to Main Street, past the shuttered hardware store and Murphy's Diner, through the small city park with its rusted swings, then home again. The entire journey took exactly 23 minutes. Mary Thompson, retired from 40 years of teaching third grade, nearly dropped her morning coffee when she first witnessed this daily miracle. "In all my years working with children," she whispered to her husband, "I've never seen anything like it." The sight of tiny Hope walking confidently beside 95 pounds of controlled power seemed to defy every law of nature and common sense. Word spread through Millbrook like smoke from a grass fire. By the end of the first week, residents began timing their morning routines to catch a glimpse of the girl and her shadow. Frank Sullivan, the town's mayor for 12 years, found himself lingering at his office window each morning, watching Hope's transformation from the shy child who hid behind her mother's legs to someone who held her head high, speaking softly to Shadow as they walked. The local cafe owner, Rita Kowalski, began saving the day's first batch of hot chocolate, stepping outside each morning to offer Hope a small cup. "Morning, sweetheart," she would call, and Hope would whisper, "Thank you," while Shadow sat perfectly still, amber eyes alert but calm. Within a month, children throughout the town were begging their parents for dogs like Hope's, though no one could explain exactly what made Shadow different. Tom Bradley, sheriff for 15 years, had seen his share of unusual situations, but watching Hope and Shadow navigate the morning crowds left him speechless. "That dog moves like he's been programmed," he told his deputy. "Never seen anything like it. Kid whispers something, and he responds like he's reading her mind." But across town, Dorothy Winchester watched through her lace curtains with growing alarm. Each morning brought the same sight: a 7-year-old child walking an unleashed predator through populated streets. She photographed them with her old Kodak camera, documenting what she saw as evidence of reckless endangerment. Her medical journals from nursing school contained countless case studies of dog attacks, statistics burned into her memory like scars. The first confrontation occurred on March 10th, a Tuesday morning when Dorothy could no longer contain her concern. She approached Hope and Shadow at the park's entrance, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. "Excuse me, dear," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of decades in pediatric care. Hope immediately stepped behind Shadow, who positioned himself between the child and Dorothy without aggression, simply creating a barrier. His amber eyes remained calm, but his body language spoke of absolute protection. "That animal is too dangerous for a child to handle alone," Dorothy stated, her nurse's training demanding directness. "Where are your parents?" Hope's whispered response was lost in the morning breeze, but Shadow's positioning became more pronounced, his massive frame creating an impenetrable shield around the small girl. "I said, where are your parents?" Dorothy repeated, stepping closer. "A dog that size could kill you without meaning to." Sarah Carter's arrival interrupted the standoff, her diner uniform wrinkled from a night shift that had stretched until dawn. "Mrs. Winchester, isn't it?" Sarah's voice carried the exhaustion of a mother working multiple jobs. "I'd appreciate if you'd step away from my daughter." "I'm trying to help," Dorothy replied, her voice rising. "That dog is a lawsuit waiting to happen. I've seen what they can do to children." "Mind your own business," Sarah snapped, reaching for Hope's hand. "Shadow has never hurt anyone." "Neither had Tommy's dog," Dorothy whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. A small crowd had gathered, morning walkers and early commuters drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Patterson from the flower shop stood beside Jim Morrison, the retired postal worker, both watching as two women faced off over a child and her dog. "That's not fair," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. Hope needs Shadow. You don't understand. I understand better than you think, Dorothy replied, memories of Tommy's last day flooding back. I understand what happens when people ignore warning signs. As Sarah led Hope away, Shadow following in perfect formation, Dorothy remained standing in the park, watching their retreat. The small crowd dispersed, but not before she heard the whispers beginning. Questions about the dog's training, about the family's methods, about whether such a relationship was natural or safe. That evening, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything she remembered about dog attack statistics, liability laws, and child safety regulations. If the Carter family wouldn't protect their daughter, someone else would have to step in. The war for Hope's future had begun. Dorothy Winchester's campaign began with a yellow legal pad and 40 years of nursing instincts screaming that disaster loomed ahead. She spent the evening after her confrontation with Sarah Carter, researching everything she could find about German Shepherd attacks, liability laws, and municipal regulations regarding dangerous animals. By midnight, she had filled 12 pages with statistics that made her blood run cold. Bite force of 238 pounds per square inch, 17 fatalities nationwide in the previous year, average victim age under 10 years old. The next morning, she knocked on the door of Frank Sullivan's modest ranch house on Oak Street. The mayor answered in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, clearly not expecting visitors at 7:30 in the morning. "Dorothy, what brings you by so early?" Frank asked, though his expression suggested he already knew this wouldn't be a social call. "That Carter child is going to get herself killed," Dorothy stated without preamble, holding up her manila folder of research. "And when it happens, this town will be liable for every penny of the lawsuit." Frank stepped onto his porch, closing the door behind him. He'd known Dorothy for 20 years, respected her medical expertise, but also knew her tendency toward worst-case scenarios. "Have you seen any aggressive behavior from the dog?" "Aggressive behavior?" Dorothy's voice rose an octave. "Frank, that animal weighs nearly 100 pounds. It doesn't need to be aggressive to be deadly. One moment of excitement, one unexpected movement, and that little girl could be dead before anyone could react. But has Shadow actually done anything threatening?" Dorothy opened her folder, pulling out photographs she'd taken from her window. "Look at these pictures. No leash, no muzzle, no adult supervision. That dog could bolt at any moment, drag her into traffic, attack another child, or simply knock her down and break her neck." Frank studied the images, seeing what Dorothy saw, but also noticing what she missed. Hope's confident posture, Shadow's controlled movements, the obvious bond between child and animal. "Dorothy, I understand your concerns, but—" "My grandson was 5 years old," Dorothy interrupted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Tommy Morrison. He was playing in his backyard when the neighbor's Rottweiler got loose. The dog had never shown aggression before either, never even barked at children. But that day, something triggered its prey drive, and in 30 seconds, a beautiful little boy was gone forever." Frank's expression softened. He'd heard whispers about Dorothy's family tragedy, but never the full story. "I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't mean—" "It means everything," Dorothy said firmly. "It means I know what complacent adults tell themselves right up until the moment their world ends. He's such a good dog. He's never hurt anyone. Dogs can sense children's innocence. All lies we tell ourselves until we're standing in a hospital corridor being told our child is never coming home." That afternoon, Dorothy began her door-to-door campaign. Armed with her folder of statistics, photographs, and a carefully worded petition titled Millbrook Child Safety Initiative, she visited every house within a 6-block radius of the Carter family's daily walking route. Her first stop was the Patterson residence, where elderly Mrs. Patterson tended her flower garden despite the March chill. I'm trying to prevent a tragedy, Dorothy explained, showing her research. That little Carter girl is in constant danger, and her parents seem oblivious to the risk. Mrs. Patterson, 78 and grandmother to 6, listened carefully before signing the petition. I've always been nervous about large dogs around children, she admitted. My daughter won't even visit when the neighbors have their German Shepherd outside. At the Morrison house, retired postal worker Jim Morrison initially resisted. That little girl seems happy, he argued. Happier than I've ever seen her, to be honest. Tommy seemed happy too, Dorothy replied quietly. Right up until the end. Jim's resistance crumbled. He'd known Dorothy's family before the tragedy, remembered the bright-eyed boy who used to help him sort mail during school visits. What exactly are you asking for? Municipal ordinance requiring leashes and muzzles for dogs over 50 pounds in public spaces, Dorothy read from her petition. Adult supervision mandatory for children under 12 with large animals. Basic common sense to protect our most vulnerable residents. By the end of the week, Dorothy had collected 89 signatures from 127 households visited. The petition text was carefully crafted to avoid mentioning the Carter family specifically, instead focusing on preventing predictable tragedies through reasonable safety measures. News of the petition spread quickly through Millbrook's interconnected social networks. Sarah Carter learned about it during her Thursday evening shift at Murphy's Diner when regular customer Jake Phillips mentioned seeing Dorothy at his door. "What exactly is she asking for?" Sarah demanded, her hands shaking as she refilled his coffee cup. "Leashes and muzzles for big dogs," Jake replied uncomfortably. "Makes sense, I guess. Never know when an animal might snap." Sarah's face went white. "Shadow has never snapped at anyone. He's the gentlest creature alive." "Maybe so," Jake said, "but that Winchester woman seems to know her stuff. She's got medical credentials, statistics, real convincing arguments about liability and such." That night, Sarah and Bobby sat at their kitchen table with mounting dread as they realized the scope of Dorothy's campaign. Their neighbor across the street, Mrs. Henley, had signed the petition. So had the family 3 houses down, the couple who ran the corner grocery, and dozens of others they'd considered friendly acquaintances. "She's turning the whole town against us," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Against hope." Bobby's calloused hands clenched into fists. "We can't let them take Shadow away. Hope barely spoke before he came. You've seen how much better she's doing." "But what if Dorothy's right?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What if something terrible happens? What if Shadow does hurt someone, or Hope gets injured because we were too stubborn to see the danger?" "That's not going to happen," Bobby said firmly, though his voice lacked conviction. "Shadow's different, special. You've seen how he is with her." Neither of them noticed Hope standing in the doorway in her pajamas, having heard every word. In her 7-year-old mind, the adults were discussing taking Shadow away because he was dangerous. The thought filled her with terror so profound that she couldn't even cry. Instead, she crept back to her room where Shadow lay beside her bed, placed her small hand on his massive head, and whispered the first prayer of her young life. "Please don't let them take you away. You're all I have." The Millbrook Gazette ran the story on page 3 of their Thursday edition, "Town Divided Over Girl and Her Giant Dog." Within hours, the article had been shared across social media platforms, transforming a local dispute into a viral sensation that drew attention from as far away as Omaha and Kansas City. The photograph accompanying the story showed Hope and Shadow silhouetted against the morning sun, an image both beautiful and controversial depending on the viewer's perspective. Jessica Walsh, an investigative reporter from the Omaha World-Herald, arrived in Millbrook on a Friday afternoon, her rental car pulling up outside Murphy's Diner just as Sarah Carter finished her lunch shift. The reporter's presence sent ripples of excitement and anxiety through the small town where most residents had never been interviewed by anyone more significant than the local weather forecaster. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Jessica Walsh from the World Herald, the reporter introduced herself as Sarah stepped into the parking lot. I'd like to discuss the situation with your daughter and her dog. This story has captured national attention, and I think people deserve to hear your side. Sarah's exhaustion was visible in every line of her face. Double shifts at the diner, mounting legal pressure, and the constant stress of protecting Hope had aged her years in just weeks. "I don't know what good talking will do," she said quietly. "People have already made up their minds." "Maybe not," Jessica replied gently. "Tell me about Shadow. How did he come into Hope's life?" The story that emerged over the next hour revealed a family's desperate love and sacrifice. Sarah spoke about Hope's diagnosis, the speech therapy sessions that drained their savings, the isolation that had gradually consumed their daughter until Shadow's arrival. She described mornings when Hope had refused to leave her room, afternoons spent in frustrated silence, and the miracle of watching her child finally engage with the world. "Shadow didn't just give Hope a companion," Sarah explained, tears streaming down her face. "He gave her confidence, purpose, a reason to face each day. Before him she was disappearing into herself. Now she talks to him constantly, tells him about her day, shares her fears and dreams. He's not just a pet, he's her lifeline." Meanwhile, Dorothy Winchester was conducting her own media campaign. She met with Jessica Walsh that evening at her Victorian home. Medical journals and case studies spread across her dining room table like evidence in a trial. Her presentation was methodical, professional, devastating in its clinical precision. "I've worked pediatric emergency rooms for 4 decades, Dorothy began, her voice steady and authoritative. "I've seen dog attacks that haunt me to this day. Children who survived but will never look the same. Families destroyed by split-second tragedies that could have been prevented with basic safety measures." She produced photographs from her nursing career, images too graphic for publication but powerful enough to shake any parent's confidence. "This isn't about being anti-dog," Dorothy continued. "This is about acknowledging reality. German shepherds were bred to be working animals, guard dogs, protectors of property. Their instincts can override training in an instant, especially around children whose movements and voices can trigger prey responses." Jessica Walsh found herself caught between two compelling narratives: a family's love story and a professional's warning. Her article, published the following Sunday, presented both perspectives with careful neutrality, but the damage was already spreading beyond Millbrook's borders. The GoFundMe campaign appeared online Monday morning, created by an anonymous supporter who called themselves Friend of Hope. The goal was $25,000 for legal fees and family support, accompanied by the viral photograph of Hope and Shadow walking through downtown Millbrook. Within 48 hours, the campaign had raised $18,000 from donors across the country, each contribution accompanied by messages of support and outrage. "This is America," wrote one donor from Texas. "If this family wants to let their child walk with a trained dog, that's their constitutional right." "Prayers for Hope and Shadow," posted a grandmother from Florida. "Don't let the fear-mongers win." But not all responses were supportive. Death threats began arriving in the Carter family's mailbox, anonymous letters filled with vitriol and accusations. Someone spray-painted "child killer" across their front door. Their mailbox was destroyed twice in 1 week, the metal twisted and dented by unknown assailants who struck under cover of darkness. The town itself began to fracture along invisible lines. Businesses took sides, often subtly but unmistakably. Murphy's Diner, where Sarah worked, posted a sign reading, "We support Hope and Shadow." The pharmacy, where Dorothy filled her prescriptions, displayed a notice about responsible pet ownership. Customers began choosing where to shop based on their position in what locals started calling the dog war. Sheriff Tom Bradley found himself mediating disputes that would have seemed absurd months earlier. Neighbors stopped speaking to each other. Church congregations divided during Sunday services, with Reverend Michael Patterson struggling to maintain peace in his own sanctuary. "We are called to love one another," he preached one particularly tense Sunday morning, "not to let fear divide us from our Christian duty." But even his words couldn't heal the growing rift between those who saw Shadow as hope's guardian angel and those who viewed him as a tragedy waiting to happen. The breaking point came during the April 15th City Council meeting. Dorothy had submitted her petition officially, requesting Municipal Ordinance 247B, requiring leashes and muzzles for dogs over 50 pounds in public spaces. The council chamber, normally host to discussions about snow removal and street repairs, was packed with over 200 residents, many standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Dorothy spoke first, her presentation lasting 45 minutes. She cited statistics, legal precedents, and insurance liability issues with the precision of someone who had spent her career dealing with life and death decisions. Her voice never wavered as she described Tommy's death in clinical detail, forcing the audience to confront the reality of what could happen when large dogs and small children intersected violently. "I am not asking this council to destroy anyone's family," she concluded. "I am asking you to prevent the destruction of another family. The next Tommy could be Hope Carter. The next devastated grandmother could be any of us. We have the power to prevent this tragedy, and if we choose not to act, we bear responsibility for the consequences." The response was thunderous applause from her supporters, mixed with angry shouts from Hope's defenders. Sarah Carter spoke next, her hands trembling as she approached the microphone. "Shadow isn't just our pet," she began, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmurs. "He's Hope's bridge to the world. Before Shadow, my daughter was lost inside herself, unable to connect with people, struggling with every interaction. He gave her confidence, purpose, joy. Taking him away wouldn't protect her, it would destroy her." She paused, gathering courage from somewhere deep inside her exhausted soul. "Mrs. Winchester lost her grandson, and my heart breaks for her. But punishing my daughter for someone else's tragedy won't bring Tommy back. It will only create another kind of loss, another kind of grief." The council's vote was scheduled for the following month, but the damage was already done. Lines had been drawn, positions established, relationships severed. Hope, caught in the center of this adult storm, began showing signs of the stress that surrounded her. She stopped eating regularly, lost weight, and developed dark circles under her eyes that made her appear older than her 7 years. Shadow seemed to sense the growing tension, staying closer to Hope during their walks, more alert to the stares and whispers that followed them through downtown Millbrook. His amber eyes held a wariness that hadn't been there before, as if he understood that his presence was now controversial, that his bond with Hope had become a battleground for adult fears and prejudices. The anonymous tip that brought Sheriff Bradley to the Carter house came on a Tuesday evening in late April. Someone had reported possible animal abuse, claiming they'd seen evidence of unnatural control over the German Shepherd. The welfare check revealed no abuse, only a stressed family and a dog who seemed more attuned to human emotion than most people. But as Sheriff Bradley filed his report stating no evidence of wrongdoing, Dorothy Winchester watched from her window across town, satisfied that she had planted another seed of doubt in the community's mind. The war for Hope's future was escalating, and neither side seemed willing to surrender. The emergency city council meeting on July 30th drew crowds that hadn't been seen in Millbrook since the state championship football game 15 years earlier. Cars lined Main Street for 6 blocks in every direction, forcing late arrivals to park at the elementary school and walk through the humid Nebraska evening. News vans from Omaha, Lincoln, and Kansas City created a media circus outside the modest municipal building, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that threatened rain. Inside the packed auditorium, 400 residents filled every seat, lined the walls, and crowded the doorways, despite fire code violations that Sheriff Bradley chose to ignore. The air conditioning system, designed for gatherings of 50 people maximum, wheezed helplessly against the combined body heat and mounting tension. Hope Carter sat in the front row between her parents, Shadow lying at her feet with his massive head resting on her small sneakers. She wore her best dress, a blue floral pattern that Sarah had bought for Easter, now slightly too large due to the weight she'd lost during months of stress. Her wide eyes took in the sea of adult faces, some friendly, others openly hostile, all focused on her and the dog who had become the center of their community's civil war. Dorothy Winchester entered through the side door at exactly 7 o'clock, her silver hair perfectly arranged, her navy suit pressed and professional. She carried a leather briefcase that contained 40 years of medical expertise and 12 years of grief, both of which she intended to use as weapons in this final battle. As she walked to the designated speakers area, a path cleared through the crowd as if she carried an invisible force field of authority and sorrow. Judge Margaret O'Brien, serving as the evening's moderator due to the legal implications involved, called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. We are here tonight to consider Municipal Ordinance 247B, which would require leashes and muzzles for dogs over 50 pounds in public spaces within city limits. Mrs. Winchester, as the petitioner, you may present your case first. Dorothy's presentation was devastating in its clinical precision. She spoke for 45 minutes without notes, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent in pediatric emergency rooms. She cited statistics that painted German Shepherds as ticking time bombs, bite force measurements, attack frequencies, victim demographics that skewed heavily toward children under 10 years old. In my professional opinion, Dorothy stated, her eyes never leaving the council members' faces, Hope Carter is in constant, immediate danger. German Shepherds were bred as guard dogs, programmed by genetics to protect territory and assert dominance. Their size alone makes them lethal weapons in the hands of children who cannot possibly control their movements or predict their reactions. She produced enlarged photographs of dog attack victims, images so graphic that several audience members gasped audibly. These are the children whose parents believed their dogs were different, special, perfectly trained. Every one of these tragedies began with the same words we're hearing tonight. He's such a good dog, he would never hurt anyone. The emotional peak of Dorothy's testimony came when she spoke about Tommy, her voice finally breaking after maintaining professional composure for nearly an hour. My grandson was 5 years old when his neighbor's Rottweiler decided to play. The dog had lived next door for 3 years without incident. Tommy had pet him hundreds of times. But dogs don't think like humans. In their minds, children are prey animals, small, weak, making high-pitched sounds that trigger hunting instincts bred into them over thousands of years. She paused, allowing the image to sink into every parent's imagination. When the ambulance arrived, Tommy was still conscious. He looked at me with his beautiful brown eyes and asked why the doggie was angry with him. He died before I could answer that question, and I've been living with that silence for 12 years. The auditorium fell silent, except for muffled sobs from several women in the audience. Dorothy's emotional manipulation was masterful, professional, utterly convincing. Sarah Carter's response began with trembling hands and a voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Winchester's loss is heartbreaking," she said, looking directly at Dorothy across the crowded room. "No parent should ever experience that kind of pain. But punishing my daughter for someone else's tragedy won't bring Tommy back. It will only create another kind of loss." Sarah's testimony revealed the financial sacrifices the family had made for Shadow. Their savings account emptied, Bobby's tools pawned, her wedding ring sold to pay for Hope's ongoing therapy sessions. "We didn't buy Shadow on a whim," she explained. "We spent months researching, consulting specialists, trying to find something, anything, that might help Hope connect with the world." The transformation in Hope's behavior since Shadow's arrival was documented through school reports, therapy notes, and video recordings that Sarah played on her phone, holding it up toward the crowd. The footage showed Hope before Shadow, silent, withdrawn, hiding behind furniture when visitors came. Then Hope after Shadow, speaking in full sentences, making eye contact, laughing at his gentle antics. "Shadow didn't just give Hope a pet," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He gave her courage, confidence, a reason to face each day. Before him, she was disappearing into herself. The doctors were talking about residential programs, specialized schools, medication that might help but carried serious side effects. The most powerful moment came when Sarah called Hope to the microphone. The 7-year-old walked slowly to the front of the auditorium, Shadow following with perfect precision, positioning himself beside her small frame like a living shield against 400 staring eyes. "Can you tell everyone about Shadow?" Sarah asked gently. Hope's voice was barely audible, but in the hushed auditorium, every word carried to the back rows. "Shadow is my best friend. He helps me when I'm scared. He knows when I'm sad and makes me feel better. He's not mean. He's the nicest dog in the whole world." She paused, looking directly at Dorothy Winchester with the devastating honesty that only children possess. "The sad lady thinks Shadow is dangerous, but he's not. He saves me every day. If you take him away, who will save me?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a grass fire, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, the weight of the decision pressing down on them like humid July air. Councilmember Patricia Hayes, a retired teacher who had worked with special needs children for 30 years, asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Mrs. Carter, what specific training does Shadow have? How can a child control a 95-pound dog?" Sarah's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough to plant doubt in every observer's mind. "He's specially trained. We worked with professionals, specialists who understood Hope's specific needs." "What kind of specialists?" Dorothy interjected from her seat. "What training methods? What certifications? Where are the credentials that prove this animal is safe around children?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's inability to provide specific answers about Shadow's training created exactly the doubt Dorothy had been cultivating for months. In the absence of concrete information, fear filled the vacuum like water rushing into a sinking ship. The council's vote was scheduled for the following evening, but the damage was already done. Dorothy Winchester had successfully painted Shadow as an uncontrolled weapon in the hands of a child, while the Carter family's evasiveness about his training had only confirmed her narrative. As the meeting adjourned, Hope clutched Shadow's fur with desperate fingers, somehow understanding that her world was about to change forever. The gavel fell at 8:47 on the evening of July 31st, sealing Hope Carter's fate with the finality of a coffin nail. 6 council members voted in favor of Municipal Ordinance 247B, while 3 dissented, their voices drowned in the eruption of cheers and sobs that followed Judge O'Brien's announcement. Shadow must be removed from Hope's custody within 30 days, effective immediately. Hope's reaction was silence, more devastating than any scream. She simply stopped moving, her small body going rigid in the plastic auditorium chair as if her nervous system had shut down completely. Shadow, sensing her distress, rose from his position at her feet and pressed his massive frame against her legs, a gesture that now carried the weight of goodbye. Sarah Carter's breakdown was immediate and public. "You're killing her! She screamed at the council members, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You're murdering my daughter's soul." Bobby had to physically restrain his wife as she lunged toward the council table, her maternal instincts transformed into something primal and desperate. The legal machinery moved with bureaucratic efficiency that felt obscene in its swiftness. By 9:30 that same evening, Sheriff Bradley arrived at the Carter household with a court order and 3 animal control officers. The scene that unfolded in their modest living room would haunt everyone present for years to come. Hope had barricaded herself in her bedroom with Shadow, pushing her small dresser against the door with strength born of desperation. When the adults finally gained entry, they found her curled in the corner, arms wrapped around Shadow's neck, whispering promises that neither of them could keep. "I won't let them take you," she repeated like a prayer, her tears soaking into Shadow's black fur. "We'll run away together. We'll hide where they can't find us." Shadow remained perfectly still, allowing Hope to cling to him while the adults struggled with their own emotions. Officer Martinez, a 20-year veteran of animal control, found himself wiping tears as he approached the pair with a regulation leash and collar. "Sweetie," he said gently, "we have to follow the law, but Shadow will be taken care of, I promise. He'll be safe." The moment they separated, Hope from Shadow broke something fundamental in the small house on Elm Street. Hope's screams were wordless, primitive, the sound of a child whose world was being systematically destroyed by adults who claimed to know better. Shadow was led away without resistance, his amber eyes fixed on Hope until the front door closed between them forever. Hope was hospitalized within 18 hours. The pediatric emergency room at Regional Medical Center had never seen a case quite like hers, a 7-year-old suffering from what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown. She refused all food, wouldn't speak to doctors or nurses, and remained catatonic except for episodes of violent thrashing that required restraints. Dr. Patricia Hayes, the hospital's chief pediatrician, reviewed Hope's case with growing alarm. "I've seen children traumatized by abuse, divorce, death in the family," she told Sarah and Bobby during a consultation that felt more like a funeral. "But this level of regression is unprecedented. It's as if she's shutting down completely." The medical tests revealed nothing physically wrong with Hope, which somehow made everything worse. Her blood pressure was elevated, stress hormones were through the roof, but there was no physical injury to treat. No medication that could heal a heart broken by legal decree. Meanwhile, Shadow was confined to the county animal shelter, a concrete and chain-link facility that housed abandoned dogs and cats waiting for adoption or euthanasia. The transformation in him was immediate and heartbreaking. The confident, purposeful animal who had walked Millbrook's streets with royal bearing became a shadow of himself, refusing food and spending his days pressed against the chain-link fence, watching the road for Hope's return. Shelter supervisor Rebecca Chen had worked with traumatized animals for 15 years, but Shadow's depression was unlike anything in her experience. "He's grieving," she reported to Sheriff Bradley. "Dogs can die from broken hearts, especially ones with this level of emotional attachment." Dorothy Winchester should have felt vindicated. She had successfully removed what she considered a dangerous threat from her community, prevented another tragedy like Tommy's death, protected Hope from the fate that had befallen her grandson. Instead, she found herself unable to sleep, haunted by images of Hope's devastating breakdown and the absolute silence that had replaced the little girl's morning conversations with Shadow. Her neighbors no longer spoke to her during trips to the grocery store. Her phone stopped ringing with social invitations that had sustained her through 8 years of widowhood. The Victorian house on Maple Street that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a prison, its rooms echoing with the ghosts of good intentions that had somehow transformed into a nightmare. On the 5th day of Hope's hospitalization, Dorothy stood at her kitchen window watching the sunrise paint Main Street in shades of gold and amber, the same colors as Shadow's eyes. For the first time since Tommy's death, she wondered if being right was worth the price of being alone. The manila envelope arrived under Dorothy Winchester's front door on a Tuesday morning, sliding across the hardwood floors of her Victorian home like a whispered confession. Her name was written across the front in block letters, no return address, no postmark to indicate its origin. Inside, she found 47 pages that would shatter everything she thought she knew about Hope Carter and the dog she had worked so relentlessly to remove. Shadow's complete medical and training records filled the envelope like evidence in a trial, where Dorothy had been both prosecutor and judge, only to discover she had convicted an innocent soul. The letterhead at the top of each page read, K9 Heroes Foundation, Military Service Animal Training Division, with an address in Virginia and credentials that made Dorothy's nursing qualifications seem modest by comparison. The first document was a purchase agreement dated 18 months earlier, showing that Shadow had cost not the $15,000 Dorothy had assumed, but $52,000, funded entirely by the K9 Heroes Foundation's Special Needs Program. The foundation, she learned, was established by military families who had lost children to various disabilities and dedicated their resources to providing specially trained service animals to families who could never afford them otherwise. Shadow's training records revealed a precision that made Dorothy's medical background seem elementary. 18 months of intensive conditioning by former military trainers, specialists in what the documents termed medical alert and response protocols. The specificity was staggering. Shadow had been trained to detect minute changes in human biochemistry that preceded epileptic seizures, to position himself as a physical barrier during episodes, to apply deep pressure therapy to specific points on a child's body, and to execute emergency alert procedures that could summon help faster than any electronic device. But it was the medical records that stopped Dorothy's heart completely. Hope Elizabeth Carter had been diagnosed with a rare form of childhood epilepsy called Dravet syndrome, a condition so severe and unpredictable that children could die from seizures triggered by stress, excitement, or changes in routine. The seizures were often preceded by only 30 to 45 seconds of biochemical changes undetectable by machines but recognizable to a properly trained dog. Dr. Amanda Richardson's notes, written in the precise handwriting Dorothy recognized from decades of medical charts, painted a picture of desperate parents facing an impossible situation. Hope's seizures had been increasing in frequency and severity. Medications carried side effects that would have limited her cognitive development. Traditional seizure alert devices had proven ineffective due to the brief warning period and Hope's small size. Patient requires constant supervision due to unpredictable seizure activity, Dr. Richardson had written. Traditional medical interventions insufficient. Recommend immediate placement with trained medical alert animal as life-sustaining intervention. Without constant monitoring, patient faces significant risk of status epilepticus and potential fatal outcome. Dorothy's hands trembled as she read the veterinarian reports documenting Shadow's 99.7% accuracy rate in predicting Hope's seizures during the final months of training. Video timestamps showed Shadow alerting to episodes an average of 43 seconds before onset, positioning himself to cushion Hope's falls, applying pressure to prevent her from biting her tongue, and executing learned behaviors to signal for emergency assistance. The final document was a letter from Colonel James Mitchell, Shadow's primary trainer, explaining the selection process that had matched this specific dog with this specific child. Shadow had been bred from a line of military service animals whose bloodline traced back 40 years to Vietnam-era Medical Corps dogs. His temperament, intelligence, and biochemical sensitivity had been tested and refined through generations of selective breeding that created animals capable of medical detection, work that bordered on the miraculous. Shadow represents the culmination of 4 decades of military service animal development, Colonel Mitchell had written. His bond with Hope Carter is not emotional attachment but medical necessity. Separating them would be equivalent to removing a pacemaker from a cardiac patient. The consequences would be immediate and potentially fatal. As Dorothy absorbed the magnitude of her mistake, the telephone rang with news that confirmed her worst fears. Dr. Patricia Hayes was calling from Regional Medical Center, her voice tight with professional concern barely masking personal anger. "Dorothy, I need you to listen very carefully," Dr. Hayes began. "Hope Carter had a major seizure this morning. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of continuous activity. We managed to stop it with emergency medication, but she's in intensive care now, and her brain activity is showing signs of damage." Dorothy's knees gave out, forcing her to sit heavily in her kitchen chair. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that without Shadow's early warning system, we had no way to prepare for the episode. Hope went from normal conversation to full tonic-clonic seizure in seconds. If this had happened at home instead of in a monitored hospital environment, she would be dead right now." The silence stretched between them like a chasm that no words could bridge. Finally, Dr. Hayes continued, her voice softer but no less devastating. "Dorothy, I've known you for 20 years. I've respected your medical expertise and your concern for children's welfare, but what you've done to this family, what you've done to this child, is unconscionable. You need to fix this." After ending the call, Dorothy sat in her empty kitchen surrounded by the debris of her self-righteous crusade. The medical records spread across her table told the story of a family's desperate love and a community's willful ignorance. She had used her medical credentials to destroy the very thing that was keeping hope alive, had wielded Tommy's death as a weapon against another child who needed protection just as much as her grandson had. The drive to Regional Medical Center took 12 minutes, but Dorothy felt as if she were traveling through time itself, moving from the person she had been that morning to someone she barely recognized by the time she parked in the visitor's lot. Sarah and Bobby Carter sat in the ICU waiting room looking like refugees from their own lives, holding hands with the desperation of people clinging to wreckage in a storm. "Mrs. Winchester," Sarah said when she saw Dorothy approaching, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Come to see if you succeeded in killing her?" The accusation hit Dorothy like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain standing. "I came to apologize," she said quietly, "and to try to fix what I've done." Bobby stood up, his mechanic's hands clenched into fists. "Apologize? Our daughter's fighting for her life because of you. Your apology doesn't mean anything now." "You're right," Dorothy replied, pulling the manila envelope from her purse. "But this might." She spread Shadow's medical records across the waiting room table, watching as Sarah and Bobby read the documents with growing amazement and rage. The complete picture of their daughter's condition, Shadow's training, and the medical necessity of their bond painted Dorothy's campaign as something darker than misguided concern. It revealed her actions as a systematic attack on a disabled child's life support system. "You knew," Sarah whispered, looking up from the papers. "Or you could have known if you'd bothered to ask before you decided to destroy our family." "I didn't know," Dorothy admitted. "But you're right. I should have asked. I should have investigated instead of assuming. I let my own grief and fear turn me into the very thing I was trying to protect children from." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, visible evidence of destruction that could never be completely repaired. Bobby's anger was palpable, his desire for revenge radiating from him like heat from a furnace. But Sarah's exhaustion was deeper than rage, her maternal instincts focused entirely on the fight happening behind the ICU doors. "Can you get Shadow back?" Sarah asked finally, cutting through the emotional debris to the only question that mattered. Can you undo the legal nightmare you created and bring back the only thing that can save our daughter? Dorothy nodded, pulling out her cell phone with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Judge O'Brien, this is Dorothy Winchester. I need to file an emergency motion to reverse the council's decision. I have new evidence that changes everything. As Dorothy spoke into the phone, explaining the medical records and requesting an immediate hearing, Sarah and Bobby held each other in the waiting room of a children's hospital, praying that love and second chances might be stronger than fear and legal precedent. In a kennel 12 miles away, Shadow lay motionless on concrete, his great head resting on his paws, amber eyes fixed on a door that had not opened with Hope's voice for 8 days. His body was shutting down from grief, but somewhere in his genetically enhanced consciousness, he sensed that change was coming, that the bond between them was stronger than human law or institutional fear. The emergency court session convened at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning that would forever divide Millbrook's history into before and after. Judge Margaret O'Brien had seen many reversals in her 30-year career, but never one demanded by the very person who had initiated the original complaint. The courtroom was packed again, though the atmosphere had shifted from combative to cautiously hopeful, as if the entire town was holding its breath. Dorothy Winchester approached the witness stand with the weight of 12 years pressing down on her shoulders. She carried Shadow's medical records in a leather folder that seemed heavier than her grandson's casket had been all those years ago. As she placed her right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, she realized this was the first time since Tommy's death that the truth might actually set someone free instead of destroying them. Your Honor, Dorothy began, her voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in medicine, I stand before you today to formally withdraw my complaint against the Carter family and to present evidence that fundamentally changes our understanding of this case. She opened the leather folder and began reading from Shadow's training documentation, her voice growing stronger with each medical detail. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Dorothy revealed Hope's Dravet syndrome diagnosis, Shadow's specialized training, and the life-or-death nature of their bond. Shadow is not a pet, Dorothy explained, looking directly at the packed gallery. He is a medical device, trained to detect biochemical changes that precede life-threatening seizures. Separating him from Hope Carter is equivalent to removing a pacemaker from a cardiac patient or insulin from a diabetic child. The revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Gasps erupted from the gallery as people realized the magnitude of what had been done to Hope and her family. Several of Dorothy's former supporters sat in shocked silence, understanding for the first time that their signatures on her petition had nearly resulted in a child's death. Sarah Carter took the stand next, her testimony painting a picture of a family's desperate love and sacrifice. She spoke about Hope's seizures, the failed medications, the sleepless nights spent watching their daughter for signs of an episode that could kill her before help arrived. Her voice broke as she described the 18 months of waiting for Shadow, the miraculous transformation when he arrived, and the devastating regression since his removal. Hope hasn't just lost her companion, Sarah explained through tears. She's lost her life support system. Every day without Shadow is a day we might lose her forever. Dr. Patricia Hayes provided the medical testimony that sealed the case. She described Hope's current condition in clinical terms that made the courtroom's collective guilt almost palpable. Brain scans showing seizure damage, blood work revealing dangerous stress levels, psychological evaluations documenting severe regression in development and communication. In my professional opinion, Dr. Hayes stated, Hope Carter will not survive much longer without her medical alert dog. The seizures are increasing in frequency and intensity. Her body is shutting down from the stress of separation. We are quite literally watching a child die from a broken heart. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Colonel James Mitchell had driven from Virginia overnight, still wearing his military dress uniform when he took the witness stand. His presence commanded immediate respect from everyone in the courtroom, including Judge O'Brien. "I trained Shadow personally," Colonel Mitchell began, his voice carrying the precision of military bearing. "This animal represents the culmination of 40 years of military service dog development. His bloodline traces back to Vietnam-era Medical Corps dogs that saved countless lives in combat situations." He produced photographs of Shadow during training, videos of him detecting seizures in controlled environments, documentation of his 99.7% accuracy rate in medical alerts. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, devastating in its implications for everyone who had supported Dorothy's original campaign. "Shadow's bond with Hope Carter is not emotional attachment," Colonel Mitchell continued. "It is a medical partnership developed through months of intensive conditioning. He was bred specifically for this type of work, trained by specialists who understand the life-and-death nature of seizure detection, and placed with this family because no other intervention could provide the level of protection Hope requires." The colonel paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering his final statement. "Separating Shadow from Hope Carter is not just cruel. It is medical malpractice on a community level. You have removed a disabled child's life support system based on fear and ignorance." Judge O'Brien's decision was swift and unequivocal. Municipal Ordinance 247B was declared null and void. Shadow's removal was ruled unlawful, and his immediate return to Hope was ordered. But the legal victory felt hollow against the backdrop of a child fighting for her life in intensive care. The race to reunite Hope and Shadow became a community effort that transformed Millbrook's guilt into purposeful action. Sheriff Bradley personally drove to the county animal shelter where he found Shadow lying motionless in his kennel, refusing food and water, his magnificent coat dull with grief. The moment Shadow heard Hope's name spoken, he lifted his great head and looked toward the kennel door with the first sign of hope anyone had seen in 8 days. The reunion took place in Hope's ICU room, with medical staff standing by to monitor her vital signs. Shadow was brought in on a leash, but the moment he saw Hope lying small and pale in the hospital bed, he moved with purpose that transcended training or conditioning. He approached slowly, placing his massive head on the bed beside her still form, amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that seemed to will her back to consciousness. Hope's response was immediate and miraculous. Her eyes opened for the first time in 36 hours, focusing on Shadow's familiar presence with a clarity that had been absent since their separation. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with joy that made every adult in the room weep openly. The medical monitors reflected Hope's transformation in real time. Her heart rate stabilized, blood pressure normalized, stress hormones began declining within minutes of Shadow's return. Dr. Hayes watched the readings with professional amazement and personal relief, understanding that she was witnessing something that transcended medical explanation. "This is unprecedented," she told Sarah and Bobby as they watched Hope slowly sit up in bed, her small arms wrapping around Shadow's neck. "I've never seen such immediate physiological improvement from any intervention. The bond between them is literally life-sustaining." Within hours, Hope was speaking in complete sentences, asking for food, wondering how long she had been asleep. Shadow remained at her bedside, his training reasserting itself as he monitored her vital signs with an attention that impressed even the ICU nursing staff. When Hope's lunch arrived, Shadow positioned himself where he could observe her eating while maintaining visual contact with the door, a behavior pattern that spoke to months of specialized conditioning. The transformation extended beyond Hope's medical recovery. Dorothy Winchester found herself at the center of a community healing process that was as painful as it was necessary. Her public apology at the courthouse had been broadcast on local television, creating a ripple effect of understanding and forgiveness that reached far beyond Millbrook's borders. "I let my own grief poison my judgment," Dorothy admitted during a town hall meeting called to address the aftermath of the case. "I used my medical credentials to justify fear instead of seeking understanding. I turned Tommy's death into a weapon against another child who needed protection just as much as he did." The healing was not immediate or universal. Some residents struggled to forgive Dorothy's campaign against hope, while others found inspiration in her willingness to admit error and work for redemption. But gradually, a new narrative emerged, one that emphasized understanding over fear, investigation over assumption, and community support over individual judgment. 6 months later, Millbrook had become an unlikely center for therapy animal advocacy. The Canine Heroes Foundation established a regional training facility in the renovated building that had once housed the closed auto parts factory. Families from across the Midwest traveled to Millbrook seeking specially trained service animals for their children with disabilities. Dorothy Winchester found her redemption in service to the cause she had once opposed. Using her medical background and newly acquired understanding of therapy animal protocols, she became a volunteer coordinator for the foundation, helping match dogs with children who needed them. Her Victorian house was converted into a foster home for animals in training, and her empty rooms filled once again with purpose and life. Hope Carter returned to school with Shadow at her side, protected by federal disability laws that recognized his status as medical equipment. Her seizures, while not eliminated entirely, were managed through Shadow's early warning system with a success rate that amazed her medical team. More importantly, her confidence and communication skills continued developing at an accelerated pace, as if making up for the months of regression caused by their separation. The final chapter of Hope and Shadow's story was written not in a courtroom or hospital, but in the simple daily routine that had started everything: their morning walk through downtown Millbrook. Now, however, they were no longer alone. Other children with service animals joined them, creating a parade of hope and healing that drew visitors from across the region. As Hope and Shadow walked past Dorothy's house each morning, the elderly woman would wave from her front porch, and Hope would call out, "Good morning, Grandma Dot," with the forgiveness that only children possess. Shadow would pause briefly, allowing Dorothy to see the intelligence and gentleness in his amber eyes, before continuing his eternal vigil over the small girl whose life he had been bred to protect. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, a 7-year-old girl and her 95-pound guardian had reminded an entire community that love, properly understood and courageously defended, remains the most powerful force for healing that humanity possesses. Sometimes the greatest miracles hide behind our deepest fears, waiting for courage to unlock them. Hope and Shadow's story reminds us that love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it comes with 4 paws and amber eyes. Sometimes it requires us to admit we were wrong. And sometimes it asks us to choose understanding over judgment. Dorothy Winchester learned that healing our own wounds doesn't require wounding others, and that the bravest thing we can do is say, "I was wrong," when a child's life hangs in the balance. Hope taught an entire town that differences aren't dangers to be eliminated, but gifts to be celebrated and protected. In our world of quick judgments and social media storms, this little girl and her gentle giant proved that genuine connection transcends fear, that families come in all shapes and sizes, and that second chances can transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The morning walks continue in Millbrook, but now they represent something beautiful, proof that when we choose love over fear, understanding over assumption, and forgiveness over grudges, we create space for miracles to flourish. After all, isn't that what we're all searching for? A chance to love and be loved unconditionally? What moment in your life taught you the difference between protecting and controlling? Have you ever discovered that something you feared was actually exactly what you needed? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs to choose love over fear today.